Incredible truth. How one moment transformed a rich woman's view on a black maid's love. Margaret Sinclair brushed off the disconnect she felt with Clara Johnson for years. The black maid had been, at best, a necessary part of her daily life, someone to manage her estate while Margaret climbed the corporate ladder of Atlanta's elite legal circle. Yet, as soon as Clara approached her for help, her world swayed perilously close to chaos. "Could you possibly lend my son the money for college tuition?" The request lingered in the air like an unsaid truth, a reality that demanded to be acknowledged but felt beneath Margaret's station. Margaret scoffed internally. Wasn't it absurd to ask for financial assistance from someone she saw as more than an employee? She had built her empire on the foundation of old Southern money, and the thought of stooping to assist someone she perceived as inferior felt like a betrayal of her very identity. The summer sun beat down on her opulent estate, but it was the uncertainty stirring within that threatened to choke her. Guilt knotted in her stomach as she fought against the irritation at the audacity of Clara's request. Did the maid not recognize her place in the grand scheme of their world? Doubt hung on the edges of her mind like an unwelcome guest. Who was she if not the attorney with the spectacular track record, the affluent woman overlooking the gallant lawns of Buckhead from her gourmet kitchen? Later, while leaving a lavish gala, she caught a glimpse of Clara just beyond her doorstep. Mesmerized by the lullaby drifting through the evening air, Margaret's ambivalence shattered. The melodies were rife with heartbreak and fierce love, woven into Clara's soft, rich voice. It pulled Margaret near, revealing the depth of a struggle she had cast aside. In that moment, it struck her like a lightning bolt. This was no mere employee. This woman had thrived under societal expectations imposed on her, pouring herself into the role of mother, caretaker, and keeper of dignity. The walls that Margaret had so carefully curated around herself began to tremble, forcing her to peep beyond her privilege. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. The weight of her internal conflict turned heavier the next day. Stepping into her elite social circle, she was bombarded by laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. The casual contempt for the lower class swirled around her, and Margaret suddenly felt like a stranger among her friends. Each word was like a pinprick to her conscience, urging her to align, yet she hesitated. The path ahead blurred. The only thing clear was the growing chasm between her and the life she had known. Torn between the glossy facade her friends exuded and the vivid reality she glimpsed through Clara's potent devotion, Margaret wrestled with self-doubt. "Am I worthy of this privilege?" she thought. "Or am I simply protecting my own ignorance by turning my back on a world layered in struggle?" The tightness in her chest swelled as the words echoed in her mind, leaving her breathless. No longer was she simply wrestling with transparency. She was on the verge of choosing something monumental. Yet, as Margaret poised herself on the threshold of revelation, the expectations from her elite cadre lingered, clinging like a shadow. Would true empathy uphold her status? Or would it fracture every illusion she had constructed? The need for confirmation from others loomed large, but would Margaret let her awakening drown in the sea of perception? As doubt surged within her and the echoes of Clara's lullaby played in her heart, Margaret stood on the precipice of change, torn between two worlds, one of comfort and one of connection. Margaret sat at her mahogany desk, the frenzied pace of her thoughts clashing with the quiet, polished elegance of her office. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, igniting the myriad of awards lining the walls behind her, a testament to her ruthless ambition and relentless climb through the ranks of the legal world. Yet today, that very ambition felt like a shackle, binding her to expectations that suddenly felt suffocating. The morning's events echoed in her head. Clara's plea for help, the lullaby that had pierced through the veneer of her carefully curated life, and the haunting realizations that had accompanied her. If she didn't act, she would forever ingrain herself in the narrative of apathy that had shadowed her success. Fear gripped her, the fear of the unknown, the fear of dismissing Clara entirely. It tugged at her, an insistent whisper urging her to consider what true connection might entail. Margaret's decision to seek out Clara could either shatter her seemingly impeccable image or invite a new chapter. Leaning back in her chair, she contemplated the implications. Was it possible that venturing into uncharted territory could elevate her more than the perceived safety of her elite status? With a rush of determination, Margaret resolved to visit Clara after work, acknowledging that simply writing a check was no longer enough to soothe her guilt. She needed to face the woman who had inadvertently opened her eyes. Later that day, the air shimmered with uncharacteristic warmth as she drove through the neighborhoods of Atlanta, now acutely aware of the divide between comfort and struggle. Each block passed seemed to echo Clara's son's aspirations, teased out by Margaret's own relentless pursuit of success. Her heart raced, bombarded with doubts about whether she could genuinely connect or simply mirror the pretext of altruism that had served her well in the past. As she approached Clara's modest home, the swirling thoughts coalesced into a singular focus: humility. Perhaps in showing her vulnerability, Margaret could forge a bond that transcended the power dynamics of their roles. She parked her sleek sedan in front of the small house, her breath catching for a moment as uncertainty mixed with the hope to do better. Clara answered the door with an expression that instantly betrayed her surprise. The warmth of the woman's smile met tight lines of worry etched upon her face, a testament to her ongoing struggles. Margaret's resolve faltered as she stood on the threshold, the disconnect between her world and Clara's bearing down upon her like a heavy blanket. I wanted to talk," Margaret managed to say, her voice trembling slightly but firm. The moment felt monumental, not merely a casual conversation, but an overture toward understanding. Clara nodded, stepping aside to invite her in. The interior of the house seeped with life. Children's drawings adorned the fridge, and the scent of home-cooked dinner wafted through the air. Yet the charm was punctuated by signs of wear. Margaret's heart swelled with both admiration and guilt. "I've thought a lot about what you asked," she said, cautious yet honest. Clara's brow furrowed as she sensed the gravity behind those words. Margaret continued, "And I realized it's not just about the money, is it? There's more to it. Can we talk about your son's dreams?" As they settled into the modest living room, the conversation stirred something deep within her. She had always sought respect, admiring dedication and hard work, yet never had she faced those values raw and unpolished before. Clara's strength and dreams, intricately woven into the very fabric of her determination, radiated an authenticity Margaret had long shunned. In opening up this dialogue, a crack formed in the facade of her world, allowing an unexpected warmth to rush in. As they began to navigate their conversation, Margaret found herself conjuring thoughts she had buried, questions she'd avoided in her climb for validation among her peers. Could confronting these realities truly liberate her? The weight shifted. Margaret could feel it, the beginning of a transformation. She was suspended in this space between shame and a burgeoning purpose, the revelation stirring within. Was it too late for her to redefine who she had become? The desire for growth crackled in the air, clashing with her ingrained fear of falling out of favor with her elite circle. But as Clara shared snippets of her son's ambitions, Margaret knew the moment was poised for something bigger than herself. It was a defining key, not just for Clara's son, but for her own awakening. Yet just as she sensed a breakthrough, a sharp knock echoed through the room, pulling her back into the sharp reality of her dual existence. "Margaret, are you there?" The voice was that of a familiar colleague, reminding her of the life she sought to transcend. Heart-pounding, she grappled with the harsh pull between the demands of her old world and the pulsing call of empathy ignited within her. It was a choice, a pivotal moment where she faced the dawning truth of her own identity. The moment of truth loomed with undeniable urgency, urging her to confront the dissonance threatening to unravel both her past and present. Would she step away from comfort towards authentic connection, or would she retreat back to the safety of superficial accolades? A surge of tension rippled through the room as Margaret's heart raced in response to that familiar voice. It felt like a crack had appeared in her carefully constructed world, a fault line exposing the conflict between who she had been and who she was longing to become. The knock had punctured the fragile atmosphere she'd begun to weave with Clara, threatening to dissolve the budding intimacy they had started to build. "Just a moment," she called out, squeezing her eyes shut for a fleeting second as she tried to conjure the poise that had always defined her legal presence. The fire in her chest was loud, demanding that she lean into this moment of bravery. "Margaret?" the voice repeated, this time edged with impatience. Margaret turned to Clara, her gaze a mixture of asking for permission and seeking understanding. Clara's warmth held a flicker of expectation, the kind that could either fuel a transformative spark or extinguish it under the weight of obligation. "I have to take this," she murmured, disappointment settling into the corners of her eyes as she forced herself towards the front door. She opened it, revealing a colleague, Jack, who stood with his arms crossed and a frown etched across his face. "Margaret, we need you back at the firm. There's a situation with the Parker case, very urgent," Jack insisted, his tone commanding and devoid of the empathy Margaret had just begun to discover. A wave of conflict surged through her. The very reason she had sought to break free from the confines of her previous life stood before her in this familiar, disjointed form. "I can't right now, Jack," she replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "I'm in the middle of something important." Jack raised an eyebrow, impatience morphing into incredulity. "You're serious? Important? There's no one else who can handle this, and you know how critical it is." The pressure of their exchange was suffocating, shaking her sense of self as though it had been planted on unstable ground. The urgency in Jack's voice echoed her old restrictions and the status that had shaped her life for so long. Yet as she looked back at Clara, seated quietly on the couch, her expression urged Margaret to consider that perhaps this was the moment where everything could finally change. "Just give me a moment," she snapped, an unusual fierceness erupting from within. She swung the door closed, the sound echoing with more conviction than she... The confrontation buzzed in the air, punctuated by a charged silence. "What's wrong?" Clara's question was poised with sincerity, her eyes probing Margaret's rapidly swirling thoughts. "I've built my life around what people expect from me," the words came tumbling out. "It's exhausting, and I'm starting to realize that more and more. I can't keep adhering to their timeline." "But what do you want?" Clara asked gently, leading Margaret to the edge of her discovery. Margaret leaned against the doorframe, her mind racing through the realization of her choices. For years, she had taken pride in being able to handle pressure and outmaneuver obstacles without faltering. Yet the weight of her self-imposed shackles was transforming into vision. She wanted to redefine her impact, to shape a legacy of meaning rather than accolades. "I think I want," she hesitated, feelings unfurling within her, much like the petals of a flower yearning for light. "I want to invest in what truly matters, to be more than a name on a plaque." Clara nodded, a soft smile illuminating her face, igniting a flicker of hope in Margaret's chest. But the shadows of her old life loomed large, threatening to envelop the fragile thread of aspiration in doubt. But how? What does that even look like? Maybe it starts with obtaining clarity. Margaret's voice trembled as the realization crystallized in her mind. Maybe it's time to confront my fears head on. The decision felt monumental. It was the first step toward unshackling herself from the need to impress. Yet the thought of what her colleagues would think, the whispers circulating through the law firm, returned with a vengeance. Before she could second-guess herself, she turned back to Clara, determination anchoring her swirling thoughts. I want to help your son. I want to advocate for more than just winning cases. I want to fight for someone who truly deserves it. Clara's eyes widened in surprise, but then understanding settled in. The shared dream of elevating aspirations igniting both women. As the weight of their conversation began to lift her spirits, a familiar pressure mounted. Margaret's phone buzzed ominously in her pocket, a reminder of the outside world relentlessly demanding her return. The whole narrative of her existence had been kicking and screaming against this very moment. Yet Margaret felt oddly tranquil, standing on the precipice of something new. But a final whisper gasped between the silence as she glanced toward the door, feeling the weight of expectation pulling her back toward her safe, familiar life. Now I just need to decide, she whispered, a lid pressing down on her courage. At that moment, she understood that this was more than just a pivotal decision. It was a reckoning. Would she take the leap, challenge everything she had known, and embrace this newfound desire to champion what truly mattered? Or would she be drawn back into the demands of a life that felt increasingly more hollow? Margaret stood on the edge of her truth, riddled with uncertainty. With a last glance at Clara, she realized that this moment was not merely about settling a personal conflict, but something deeper, an awakening she hadn't anticipated, and a choice that felt pivotal to her soul. As the buzzing intensified in her pocket, she had no idea that choosing a path mired in authenticity would lead her to uncover even darker truths within her own life, truths she wasn't even ready to face. Would her journey transform her irrevocably, or would the gravity of tradition keep holding her back? Margaret stood rooted at the threshold, her phone still vibrating in her pocket, a reminder of the world waiting for her return. The walls of her apartment, once a sanctuary of validation and success, now felt stifling, echoing her inner turmoil. She glanced at Clara, who remained a calming presence amidst the tempest of her thoughts. For the first time in years, Margaret felt the weight of expectations on her shoulders give way to a strange, exhilarating lightness. "I want to help," she repeated, each word slowly carving out a new identity in her mind. "I want to be more than just a lawyer chasing cases. I want to be a voice for the voiceless." Clara's response was slow in coming, but her eyes gleamed with understanding. "That's a big commitment, Margaret. You'd be stepping into uncharted territory." Margaret inhaled sharply, an unfamiliar thrill building in her chest. "I know," she replied, her voice quieter this time, but firm. "But isn't that where true change happens? By standing up for others?" It felt like a trial in the court of her own life, and she was ready to argue her case. Whenever she had faced clients in the past, her heart had raced, but now it was ignited by a different kind of passion. She wanted to advocate for genuine causes, using her skills for something more meaningful than just winning accolades. "Then let's talk about a plan," Clara said, her smile encouraging but also cautious. "But first, you have to consider what will come next. The law firm, the people there, they won't let you go so easily." Margaret swallowed hard, the implications of her decision creeping in. The firm was her safety net, her entire career wrapped in its identity. What would her colleagues think? What would Jack say when the verdict was revealed? "I'll have to make my case," she thought, casting her mind into a future that seemed both liberating and terrifying. Suddenly, her phone erupted again, a jarring sound punctuating the stillness. She fished it from her pocket, and her heart plummeted when she saw Jack's name flashing on the screen. The gravity of her situation hit her like a wave, a reminder of the battle between who she was expected to be and who she wanted to become. "Take it," Clara urged gently, sensing Margaret's hesitation. "You need to stand your ground." Margaret didn't reply. Instead, she pressed the green button and lifted the device to her ear, her nerves heightening. "Jack," she said evenly, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Where are you?" he demanded, impatience lacing his tone. "The firm needs you here. It's a crucial moment." "Jack, I can't come back right now. I've got something important to—" "Something important?" The incredulity in his voice shot through her. "Margaret, you don't understand the way this works. We need you. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the team." She almost flinched. The dichotomy of expectations and her newfound aspirations clashed violently, a storm brewing within her. With each of Jack's words, she felt the remnants of her past life battling against her burgeoning desire for something more genuine. "I understand fully, but I'm choosing to step away," she said, surprising herself again with her newfound resolve. "Step away?" His laughter was sharp, an unsettling sound. "You can't be serious. If you do this, you're throwing away your career." The silence that followed felt heavy with possibility, the weight of unmade choices hanging in the air. Was she truly prepared to dismantle the very identity that had defined her for so long? "Everything has a cost," she reminded herself quietly, locking her gaze on Clara, whose expression urged her onward. "I'm ready for the cost," she finally announced, her voice gaining strength with each syllable. "I want to be aligned with my values, not just the firm's interests. I want to fight for those who need a voice, like Clara's son, and I'll figure it out." Jack's silence was suffocating, a chasm of disbelief that echoed through the call. Margaret felt a sudden rush, as if each word uttered forged a new path forward. "Don't make this decision lightly, Margaret," Jack warned, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You have no idea what's waiting for you outside." "I won't let fear decide for me anymore," she insisted. "This is who I want to be." As she hung up, the rush of release mingled with the tension of uncertainty. Clara stepped closer, her commitment unshaken. "Now we start building your voice," she said softly. Margaret swept a hand through her hair, heart pounding from both exhilaration and the burden of her choices. "But how can I do this?" she wondered, the question louder now, demanding an answer. Clara's expression shifted, revealing layers of wisdom. "Sometimes the most profound changes come after the hardest battles. It's not just about you standing up. It's about inspiring others to stand with you." Margaret's mind whirled. What Clara was suggesting felt monumental. She had the chance to be a catalyst, to bring light to the shadows. But with newfound intention came the dawning realization. She was stepping into an arena where her convictions would be scrutinized. Was she truly ready to bear that weight? The thought lingered ominously as Margaret moved to gather her papers, her resolve illuminated against the uncertainty steadily encroaching on her future. One truth. It wouldn't be long before she'd be forced to confront those who'd fought to keep her tethered to her past, Jack, her colleagues, those who expected Margaret to be their compliant warrior rather than their revolutionary advocate. And somewhere deep within, just beyond the horizon of her endurance, she felt the faint flicker of something igniting, the kind of fire that could lead to transformation or potential ruin. Could her fledgling ambition withstand the chaos of her past returning to challenge her anew? Margaret stared out the window, the city skyline reflecting her own tumultuous state. The vibrant colors of the sunset felt like a stark contrast to the lingering shadows of doubt that loomed over her. Each radiant hue served as a reminder of the vibrant future she envisioned for herself, yet the fear of stepping into the unknown threatened to dim that light. Her heart raced as she replayed the conversation with Jack. He represented a world clinging to formulas and expectations, an arena where her worth was often tied to billable hours and successful cases. But it was in this moment of quiet reflection that she realized the depth of her resolve. The flame ignited in her heart was not going to flicker out easily, even if it meant risking everything she had known. "We need to focus on the next steps," Clara said, bringing Margaret back to the present. "What does speaking out look like for you? What channels do you want to explore?" Margaret turned to Clara, feeling both exhilarated and overwhelmed. "I'm not entirely sure. Maybe workshops or panels, something to educate others about the struggles maybe face. But I also want to take them by surprise," she pondered aloud. "I want to show my community the legal system's flaws and how we can rectify them. The voiceless need more than sympathy. They need actionable plans." Clara nodded encouragingly, writing down notes as Margaret spoke. The initial rush of ideas began coalescing into a tangible plan. Each word Margaret uttered strengthened her newfound identity, slowly painting a vivid picture of the advocate she aspired to be. "But is that enough?" she considered, the fervor in her voice gradually muting to uncertainty. The looming idea of returning to her previous life plagued her thoughts. She questioned whether she would be able to muster the courage necessary to change systemic issues when faced with the formidable, guarded environment of her old firm and its established norms. "Margaret, think about where you started," Clara prompted gently, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. "You've spent years in that world. You have first-hand insights that many don't. Use them. What did you learn from your experiences that can shape the new path for others?" Something in Clara's words flicked a switch in Margaret's mind. It was more than just courage. It was authenticity calling her name. What if I hosted a series of discussions with real cases that showcase the actual impacts of systemic failure? Real stories from families who fell through? The cracks. People who are not just statistics, but human beings with hopes and dreams, she suggested, the excitement returning to her voice. "That's compelling." Clara's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as she jotted down ideas. "But to truly connect with your audience, you need a narrative that feels real and relatable. You have to reveal the complexities of the issues through those stories." Reality began sinking in, and her thoughts surged with potential. Would she be brave enough not just to advocate, but also to expose herself as a flawed woman coming to grips with her past? The fear of vulnerability twisted her stomach. Could she effectively share her mistakes while lifting up others? Yet she understood that her journey could resonate with those she aimed to help. Margaret felt an adrenaline spike surging through her, a blend of fear and excitement. "I can't just be a lawyer returning to the courtroom to change things. I need to be more than that. I want to represent hope." As the evening turned into night, the bittersweet taste of anticipation and anxiety filled the air. Margaret's mind raced with possibilities, the outline of her blossoming vision shimmering before her. But a weight loomed ahead. Her decision to break free wasn't just a personal journey. There would be repercussions. Was she prepared to face her colleagues and Jack's backlash? To stand firm in her newfound commitment while possessing a heart that was still processing the echoes of her old life? The thought brought cold dread creeping across her skin. The question was no longer whether she would confront Jack. It was how. Margaret inhaled deeply, resolving to face this new chapter head-on, unfolding her advocacy equipped with both personal knowledge and a burning necessity for change. It would be terrifying, yet exhilarating. Tomorrow she would have to face the fierce opposition of her past, but tonight she started building the framework for who she needed to become. Standing on the cusp of transformation, she felt the pull towards authenticity greater than the push from complacency. And as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, a new fear crept in. What if she uncovered something more profound within herself than she ever anticipated? Something that could shake the very foundations of her identity to the core. The echoes of her past would not let her forget. It was just a matter of time before they came knocking, demanding confrontation. Morning light filtered through the curtains, awakening Margaret with a new urgency. The morning's quiet did little to calm the storm that raged inside her. Every moment felt electric, with the promise of change, yet tinged with anxiety over the confrontation that lay ahead. She sat up, bracing herself for what needed to be done. Determined to embrace her new path, she began outlining her approach for the discussions Clara had suggested. The stories of families impacted by the legal system swirled in her mind. Would she be able to convey their heartache authentically? As her pencil scratched across the paper, a sense of clarity began to form. The goal wasn't just to speak, it was to connect, leaving the audience not only informed but emotionally stirred. Each name she wrote served as a reminder of the very real consequences of neglect and systemic failure. James, a father who lost custody of his children due to improper legal representation. Maria, a mother struggling with foreclosure due to misleading information from her mortgage lender. These stories mirrored the very essence of what Margaret wished to change. As she contemplated her plans, self-doubt crept in once more. She had risen through the ranks of her firm through tenacity, yet the spotlight now felt heavy and daunting. What if her clients' stories forced her to relive the moments she had tried to forget? Would the fears of her past take root in her present? But a stubborn resolve began to build. Each name she wrote became a rallying cry for her commitment to transforming despair into awakening. They had endured far worse than the discomfort she faced. It was here, in this realization, that she found strength. She would not allow her fears to overshadow their narratives. Margaret dressed with intention, choosing a smart yet approachable outfit, embodying the advocate she aimed to be. As she practiced her speech in the mirror, she focused on grounding her words in authenticity rather than fear. "I want to talk about real people, real struggles," were the words echoing in her head, ringing with growing importance. The day progressed slowly until she found herself seated at a coffee shop across from Clara, the outline of her framework neatly filled with notes and handwritten case studies. Clara's expression shifted from encouraging to serious, an unspoken question pulsing between them. "What happens when you do encounter Jack?" Clara finally asked, her voice careful yet probing. The very mention of Jack's name sent a wave of nausea through Margaret. Wasn't that the crux of it all? Here she was, ready to advocate for the unheard, while a part of her still yearned for validation from him and her former life. "I don't know if I'm ready to face them," she admitted, her voice trembling. "What if he tries to belittle my experiences and the changes I want to make? What if he pushes back hard?" Clara leaned in. "But think about the moment when you stand up for these people, forcing your former allies to confront their complacency. You need to show him how real this is for you and how necessary it is for so many others. That's the power you possess." As Clara's words settled in, an unexpected sense of clarity washed over Margaret. The truth was that she had endured judgment, criticism, and pain in her career, all leading to this point. Those experiences didn't diminish her, they shaped her. Her confrontation with Jack wasn't about winning or losing, but about standing firmly in her beliefs, allowing them to pave the way for her future. The fear of what lay ahead feathered her to a past she desperately wanted to escape. Yet she felt the weight shifting. The moment of transformation was close. Tomorrow's conversation loomed larger than any previous challenge. It wouldn't just be a confrontation. It would serve as a defining moment in her evolution. As Margaret packed her notes, an unsettling realization occurred. The more she prepared for battle, the more she unearthed within herself a deeper sense of purpose, a complete commitment to ensuring the voiceless had a chance to be heard, giving permission to herself to do so as well. With that, she walked out of the coffee shop into the bustling street, determination etched in her stride. But under the surface, a nagging thought remained. What if confronting Jack would bring forth an even deeper truth, one that could unravel everything she thought she knew about who she was. And as she strived for clarity, the unexpected shadows of her former self prepared to clash with the light of her new identity. The following morning, Margaret woke with an acute awareness of her surroundings. The sunlight piercing through her window felt sharper, as if the world outside had been magically enhanced. Today was not like any other. It was a day that could either bind her to the past or propel her toward a new future. She practiced her speech one last time, nerves fluttering in her stomach, yet determination anchored her thoughts. As she arrived at the law firm's sleek glass building, she felt the oppressive weight of expectations with every footstep. The familiar scent of polished wood and fresh coffee filled the lobby, but the warmth of the setting was lost on her. Instead, she felt as if she were entering a coliseum, ready to face her opponent. With each breath, she visualized not just Jack, but the families whose lives had been marred by a system that stood indifferent to their pain. "Margaret," a colleague called out, snapping her out of the spiral of thoughts. "Are you ready for today?" His friendly demeanor did little to quell the mounting anxiety, but it reminded her why she stood there. "Ready as I'll ever be," she replied, forcing a smile. She was surprised to find herself in front of the conference room door earlier than necessary. The murmurs of conversation and abrupt laughter slipped through the cracks, amplifying her carefully constructed resolve. Yet doubt threatened to seep through. Her fingers grazed the cold metal latch. She was about to enter a battleground, and she knew the stakes. Margaret took a moment to compose herself, gripping her notes tightly in one hand. She studied her reflection in the glass before her, a reflection of who she once was, and the advocate she aspired to become. As the door swung open, she stepped into the room, her heart pounding in sync with the muted conversations around her. The familiar faces turned toward her, and instinctively her gaze fell to Jack. With a smirk playing on his lips, his casual confidence loomed larger than life, striking a direct blow at her resolve. She swallowed hard, feeling small yet inspired by those whose stories she had sworn to uphold. "Margaret!" The managing partner gestured her forward. The room quieted as she approached, and in that moment she felt the weight of every name she carried with her. She began speaking, the confidence she had rehearsed mingling with the tremors of vulnerability. The stories flowed out, each case laid bare like a tapestry revealing the very threads of human struggle. Margaret observed heads nodding, expressions shifting, the room absorbing her words. But as Jack leaned forward, his eyebrow raised, his challenge was palpable. "You really think this path is sustainable? These are individual stories, Margaret. You can't build a career on sympathy alone. It's about results, about what's profitable." The moment stretched, suffocated by tension. The fear she had anticipated washed over her again, but something else surged within. "It's not just about results, it's about impact," she replied, voice steadier than she felt. "Every one of these families represents a system that failed them. If we don't take their stories into account, we lose the essence of why we're here." Gasps of surprise cut through the room as her words hung in the air. The truth was undeniable, and yet the resistance she sensed in Jack rippled beneath the surface. She caught the eyes of her colleagues, searching for support. Instead, she saw the apprehension mixed with curiosity, and Margaret realized that while this was her moment, it was also theirs. It was more profound than just confronting Jack. It was a collective awakening. She felt a surge of power unlike anything before, a solid determination gripping her heart. "Jack," she managed, locking eyes with him, "this isn't just about the bottom line. It's about what our legacy will be. What kind of lawyers do we want to be?" And the stillness that followed, Margaret sensed the room shifting. The air crackled with potential, an invitation for those who had stood by passively to reflect. Looking back toward Jack, something shifted in her perspective. She realized he had become an obstacle, yes, but he was also a catalyst. Today could unravel everything she believed about her career and herself. Yet, as the conversation continued, she could sense that Jack was only warming up. The battle of ideals was just beginning, and Margaret now understood. True advocacy demanded more than courage. It required confrontation. What truths would unravel in this critical showdown, and would she emerge defined by her commitment or by the validation she craved? All she knew was that the real confrontation awaited, just a heartbeat away. As Margaret stood before her colleagues, the weight of their gazes settled on her like a heavy cloak. Each person was a potential ally or adversary, and she could practically hear their hearts beating in time with her own. The focus shifted back to Jack, who was gathering his words, preparing to counter her challenge. The silence almost crackled, her adrenaline sharpening her senses. "Margaret," he began, voice dripping with condescension, "you can't seriously believe that emotional appeals will sustain this firm. People come to us expecting results." There was an edge in his tone, an open invitation to spar, a need for dominance that was frustratingly transparent. "We're here to win cases, not to play therapist." Her heart raced, but a small voice reminded her that this was not just about Jack. She had a responsibility to honor the stories that had fueled her ambition, stories worth more than the mere profits Jack prized. "And what if those stories dictate how we win cases?" she countered, finding her voice more resolute. "What if success is not just about the numbers, but about changing lives? Is that not too worth fighting for?" There was a stillness, followed by a ripple of murmurs, a spark igniting curiosity within the room. Some colleagues leaned closer, clearly evaluating their own standpoints amid the multifaceted complexities of the profession. Taking a breath to fortify her resolve, Margaret began explaining the intricacies behind each case she represented. She spoke of the struggles endured and victories achieved, the legacy that the firm could produce if it dared to expand its definition of success. Each word now felt empowered, her personal history weaving through the statements, all leading to one undeniable truth. She could not compromise her values for conformity. Jack's eyes narrowed, and she sensed him recalibrating his attack. "You may see value in impact," he replied, gratingly composed, "but our clients ultimately care about the outcome. The lawyers they choose are those who can deliver the win, not who can tell a heart-tugging story." The sportsman's mentality clashed fiercely with her emerging ethos, setting the tone for an unyielding debate. "And what happens if we win without conscience?" Margaret said, her resolve crystallizing. "What good is a win if it's void of integrity? What financial gain can replace losing our commitment to those who trust us with their lives?" Her colleagues shifted, and she heard one whisper to another, but she kept her focus steady. This was her moment to expose the true divide in values, not simply between her and Jack, but within the entire firm. The atmosphere thickened as Jack drew in a deep breath, recalibrating his strategy in real time, as if he were conscious of his need to maintain more than just professional restraints. "Are you asking us to take on emotional burdens?" he probing questioned, unexpectedly shifting to a personal tone that uncomfortably lingered. "Because emotions fade, but results," he gestured grandly, emphasizing a power dynamic she had been ready to confront. Margaret clenched her jaw, but she used his words as fuel. "What I'm asking is that we don't sacrifice empathy for efficiency. There's a profound difference." She felt her heart swelling, not out of bravado, but out of genuine belief. A silence enveloped the room once more, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock, each tick echoing her conviction. The audience was no longer just witnesses. They were participants grappling with her assertions. She was discovering the competence she had long doubted, a leadership quality stemming not from titles, but from the depth she was willing to explore within her profession. However, Jack responded with a knowing smile that grated against her determination. It was an insidious indication that he felt unfazed, poised to strike back. Margaret recognized this as more than a challenge. It was a pivotal test of her values. She was standing at the crossroads of conformity and advocacy, teetering on the threshold of choosing her path forward. "Margaret," Jack finally said, his voice deceptively smooth, "the time has come to face the realities of this world. Are you truly prepared to shoulder the weight of expectation and possibly failure?" Her heartbeat pulsed louder than his taunt, echoing in her ears as it began converging with a deeper realization. As the stakes intensified, she understood that what mattered was not just whether she could withstand the pressure, but whether she would thrive within it, turning every doubt into clarity. As tension settled within the room, Margaret's thoughts raced ahead. What did it mean to live authentically, and would she dare to redefine success within this competitive arena? And then, shifting in her seat, she sensed an uncharted territory on the horizon. What would it take to shatter the constructs of traditional success? Would she risk everything to enact that transformation, risking the very foundation she had relied upon? Margaret stood rooted in place, the silence in the room amplifying her thoughts. Jack's challenge lingered like a stubborn cloud, casting shadows over her confidence. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, stirring conflicting emotions. What did failure look like? Was it the immediate judgment of her colleagues, or was it something deeper, an abandonment of the values that had driven her thus far? The question gnawed at her. She clenched her fists, grounding herself. She would not answer Jack's question with defeat. "We are caretakers of our clients' stories," Margaret asserted, her voice gaining strength. "Every decision we make reverberates beyond the walls of this office. What legacy do we want to leave? A list of wins on paper, or a cadre of lives transformed?" The room held its breath. And for a moment, Margaret dared to imagine. Instead of being a firm that merely delivered results, they could be a beacon of ethical excellence. Her envisioning energized her, and she realized how powerful a positive impact could be. Jack shifted, his posture revealing discomfort. She decided to push further. What if, in the pursuit of winning, we lose sight of our humanity? The stories we overlook could be the very ones that inspire change, not just for our clients, but for our firm's future. "Emotion won't win us cases, Margaret," he shot back, almost too quickly. "Your approach is not just impractical, it risks the foundation of everything we've built." A hint of vulnerability in his tone drew Margaret's focus. Underneath Jack's bravado lay a fear of disruption that resonated with her own. In this moment, she saw a glimmer of his own uncertainties, which mirrored her own quest for purpose amidst competition. Margaret took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Jack, think about it. Are we here just to win a legal battle, or are we seeking to cultivate a truth that brings justice? Our clients deserve more than a quick win. They deserve representation that listens, understands, and advocates fiercely." She could see a few heads nodding in the audience. This would be her rallying point. Taking a deep breath, she seized the moment. "If we want to be remembered as more than just lawyers, we have to embody the change we want to see. It starts here, today. We don't just fight cases, we fight for dignity." The tension in the air transformed, shifting from resistance to contemplation. She could sense the pulse of curiosity and the potential for a newfound alignment. Yet amidst this flicker of hope, Margaret felt the knot in her stomach tighten. Jack's ability to turn the room against her was still looming, ready to exploit any sign of weakness. If she faltered now, she risked undermining everything she aimed to build. As he stood silent for a moment, Margaret remained vigilant, her heart a drumbeat of adrenaline. She had ignited a conversation about the core of their practices, but it was still unclear how her colleagues would ultimately respond. What if they rejected this path she was proposing? Amidst those thoughts, an idea struck her. Perhaps Jack wasn't an enemy, but a crucial part of the narrative she could leverage to unify the firm. She pondered how to invite him into this process rather than create further division. Imagine the impact we could gain if we could merge your drive for success with the genuine needs of our clients, she pressed, maintaining eye contact with him, challenging him to engage. As Jack regarded her with narrowed eyes, the stakes transformed. She was not merely fighting for her vision, she was crafting a dialogue around shared values. Behind his stoic facade, she wondered, was he beginning to see? In that precarious moment, Margaret's vision shifted. Perhaps the real fight lay in guiding her colleagues toward a profound understanding of their own identities and values. Would Jack concede, or would she need to further explore the battlefield of their shared ambitions? Determined, she steeled herself for the confrontation, building on this fragile but precious momentum. What if the real transformation started not just within herself, but in opening the floor to confronting the deeper motivations behind their actions? With the room still tinged with silence, Margaret felt the dawning of a potential storm swirl around them. Would this catalyze the change she desperately needed to see, or push her one step closer to being unseated in this vital clash of ideals? Margaret Sinclair emerged from the gauntlet of confrontation, the vibrant tension of the conference room still echoing in her mind. She found herself in the hallway where the fluorescent lights had been replaced by softer daylight filtering in through the large windows. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the exhilarating taste of taking a true stand for something she believed in. The murmurs of her colleagues lingered in the air, mixed with uncertainty and curiosity about her bold assertions. The confrontation with Jack had been electrifying, and she sensed the shift, the attendance of many fine minds at the firm poised to rethink their understanding of success. The battle had not only been external, but a push against her own insecurities. This transformational experience had carved away the layers of doubt that beset her. With renewed clarity, Margaret realized the stakes were higher than she had initially grasped. It wasn't just about transforming her own career trajectory. It was about igniting a revolution within a system designed to prioritize profit over people. Each family she had spoken about represented a thread in a tapestry she could weave with conviction. The firm could become a beacon of hope if it embraced her vision. Later that day, she gathered her notes at home, reviewing the case studies and personal stories that had inspired her during the confrontation. Margaret felt the heaviness dissipate as she pieced together the new framework she envisioned for her advocacy work. It would encompass community workshops and outreach, but more importantly, it would invite others, fellow lawyers, to engage in the narratives that truly mattered. As her thoughts crystallized, there blossomed a sense of urgency. This wasn't a fleeting ambition, it was her calling to create not just a series of speeches, but an entire movement. A pivotal initiative to connect families to legal resources while educating them on their rights, thereby restoring agency to those often marginalized. The following week marked the launch of her first workshop series, promoted through community centers, schools, and online platforms. Their goal? Empowering the voiceless and educating volunteers on the legal support system with stories interwoven throughout. All around her, Margaret began to see hopeful glimmers materializing, a community eager to participate, to share, and to learn. Yet the firm's reaction remained to be seen. Initially, skepticism overshadowed her ambitious spirit. At the weekly meeting, Jack, still reluctant to fully embrace her vision, expressed doubt over the workshop's practicality for their mainstream practice. "Margaret, you're facing an uphill battle," he chided, casting a glance around the room. "Clients expect efficiency." But this time, the resolute confidence that had emerged within her shone brightly. "With all due respect, Jack," she addressed him directly, feeling the strength of her journey bolster in her resolve. "Efficiency without a heart creates a chasm between the law and those it exists to serve. We have an unprecedented opportunity to educate while we empower, and both are essential for true advocacy." Her colleagues, initially hesitant, began to nod in agreement. She could see the shift in their mindset, their understanding of what it meant to be purpose-driven lawyers slowly igniting. For the first time, many voiced their support for Margaret's plan, intrigued by the fusion of empathy and legal practice. The room, once filled with doubt, became alive with possibility. As the workshops unfolded, the community swelled with participants, eager to learn, whether they were clients, students, or even her fellow colleagues from the firm. Families began to share their stories, and the ripple effect of connection deepened. Margaret felt empowered by every shared narrative. With each event, she demonstrated the profound impact that could be achieved when empathy was integrated into action. Months later, Margaret stood on a stage before an audience that comprised both her firm and community members, celebrating the success of their outreach initiative. Proud families, once buried in legal complexities, stood beside her, rejoicing in their newfound confidence and understanding. She offered them a chance to share their journeys with the audience, and as they spoke, their words echoed in Margaret's heart. The stories she had fought for now resonated beyond her own aspirations. The validation felt like a stake driven into the ground of her new career. She had not only established herself professionally, but had helped define an entirely new path for others to follow. Margaret Sinclair emerged not as a mere attorney, but as a transformative advocate, forever shaping conversations about legal support in a way that lifted the voices of the quietest in society. As she concluded her speech, she scanned the audience, locking eyes with Jack, who sat with admiration. The battle lines had shifted from competition to collaboration, and she no longer viewed him as an adversary, but as an essential part of the journey, gathered in the pursuit of justice and humanity. From that moment, Margaret knew she had transformed in more ways than one. She embodied resilience, proving that genuine connection held the power to evolve a law firm's approach. She had done far more than conquer doubt. She had demonstrated what it truly meant to align one's values not only with ambition, but with authenticity. Margaret had forever altered the course of her life, and it sparked the hope of future change for the countless individuals she now served. Now, the call to action for all of you is clear. You need to subscribe now to this channel, ensuring you don't miss out on the next exclusive emotional stories that inspire change. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. You have the power to amplify voices that matter. Comment below with your reactions and theories about Margaret's journey and how it resonated with you. And share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to spread the journey of transformation and advocacy.